My name is Claire Holt. I am 31 years old, and I work as a mortgage underwriter. I was standing in my father's kitchen, sorting his evening medications into the little weekly pill organizer he kept on the windowsill next to a faded photo of my mother, when my phone buzzed on the counter. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and picked it up. The text was from my brother Marcus. Sold the house, wired the money, heading to Costa Rica with Diane. You're smart, Claire Bear. You'll figure the rest out. Take care of Dad. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the counter, very gently, the way you set down something fragile you don't want to break. I looked out the window at the backyard, at the old oak tree my father had hung a tire swing from when I was 7. I thought about the phone call I had made to a title company attorney 3 weeks ago. I thought about the certified letters I had sent. And then, for the first time in months, I smiled. You need to understand what my father's house means, if any of what happened next is going to make sense to you. Richard Holt built that house the year before I was born. He was a high school shop teacher for 34 years, and every single inch of that place showed his hands. The porch railings he turned himself on a lathe in the garage. The built-in bookshelves in the study fitted so precisely they looked like they had grown out of the walls. He and my mother raised 2 kids there, buried a dog there, and after my mother passed 6 years ago, my father simply kept living in that house alone because it was the only place he still felt her. It was on Alderman Street in a mid-sized town in Ohio, and it was worth somewhere around $380,000, which in the context of my father's life meant it was worth everything. My brother Marcus is 38. He is handsome in a way that has always worked in his favor, quick with a laugh, easy to trust at a party. He sells commercial insurance, or he did, and he has always lived a little bigger than his income. New truck every 2 years. Vacations that showed up on Instagram before the credit card bill showed up in his mailbox. His wife Diane is kind, the sort of kind that does not always know what is happening right in front of her. They have a daughter in 2nd grade named Rosie, who my father calls his sunshine, and who still draws him pictures of horses with enormous smiling teeth. 18 months ago, my father was diagnosed with early-stage vascular dementia. Not severe, he still knew us, still cooked his own breakfast, still watched the evening news and yelled at the weatherman. But the lapses were real. He would lose a word mid-sentence and stare at the space where it had been. He would sometimes call me by my mother's name. He would put things down and find them somewhere impossible and have no memory of moving them. His doctor said he needed more support, and our family had a conversation about what that looked like. Marcus volunteered immediately. He was enthusiastic about it in a way that, looking back, I should have questioned more carefully. He would handle Dad's finances, he said. Pay the bills, manage the accounts, keep everything organized. He had more flexibility with his schedule, he pointed out. Claire was busy with her own job, her own life. He would take care of it. What I did not know then, and what I would spend the next year slowly uncovering, was that Marcus had been struggling financially for much longer than anyone realized. 2 years of bad decisions had compounded into real debt. He owed money on a business venture that had quietly collapsed. He had been rolling balances from card to card. His income was fine on paper, but he was drowning in the kind of debt you can hide from a spouse for a surprising amount of time if you are good at deflection and your wife trusts you completely. My father's house was, from a certain angle, a solution. I did not figure it out all at once. It started with small things, the kind of things I noticed because of what I do for a living. When you spend your days reviewing mortgage documents and financial disclosures, you develop a sensitivity to numbers that do not add up. My father mentioned in passing that Marcus had suggested he consolidate his savings into one account for easier management. My father mentioned that Marcus had asked him to sign some paperwork about the house, something about updating the deed. He could not quite remember. My father mentioned once that he had given Marcus power of attorney, and when I asked when, he looked at the table and said he was not entirely sure. I asked Marcus about the power of attorney. He said it was standard, just something the elder law attorney had recommended, nothing to worry about. He said this in the tone he has always used with me, the older brother tone, the one that is friendly on the surface and dismissive underneath. I let it go for 2 more weeks. Then I drove to the county recorder's office on my lunch break. The power of attorney document was there, signed by my father 8 months ago, notarized, broad enough to cover real estate transactions, and filed 2 months after my father had told me he did not remember signing anything about the house. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a very long time. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because I think people expect it to be simple, anger, or sadness, but it is never simple when it is your own family. What I felt was something like the floor dropping out from under a room I had lived in my entire life. Marcus and I had not been close the way some siblings are, but we were family. We had sat together at our mother's funeral. We had taken turns driving to Dad's house on Sunday afternoons to have dinner with him so he would not be alone. He had helped me move into my apartment 4 years ago. He had teased me about every boyfriend I had ever brought home. The idea that he had walked our father to a notary and stood there while a man with dementia signed away the right to his own home was not something I could hold in my mind all at once. I drove back to work. I closed my office door. And then I opened my laptop and began doing what I was trained to do. Over the next 6 weeks, working evenings and weekends, I pulled every document I could legally access. I called the county recorder's office. I called my father's bank using his account number and my own name as a family member with a concern, and spoke to a fraud investigator there who was more helpful than I had expected. I called an elder law attorney named Susan Park, who I had found through a colleague, and I explained what I had found. I called the title company that handles most of the residential transactions in our county, and I spoke to their general counsel about a property on Alderman Street that I had reason to believe was being prepared for an unauthorized sale. What I found was worse than I had imagined, and by that point I had imagined quite a lot. Marcus had listed my father's house with a real estate agent 2 months prior. The listing was not public yet, but the paperwork was in motion. He had used the power of attorney to list himself as the authorized seller on behalf of Richard Holt. He had accepted an offer of $360,000 from a couple in Pennsylvania who were planning to relocate. Closing was scheduled for 11 days out. The net proceeds after costs, roughly $280,000, were to be wired directly to an account in Marcus's name alone. My father did not know his house was being sold. I know this because I asked him very carefully, one Sunday afternoon over the pot of chili he still made from scratch every week, whether he had thought about selling the house lately. He looked at me with genuine confusion and said, "Why would I sell this house? Your mother planted those roses." And then he looked out the back window at the rose bushes and smiled in a way that made it very hard to breathe. There was more. There is always more. And I have found that the more is often the thing that finally cuts through the guilt and the grief and the wish that things were different and replaces all of it with something colder and clearer. Marcus had taken out a home equity line of credit against the house 4 months earlier, $55,000, using the same power of attorney. The money was gone, paid down personal debts, transferred to accounts I could not trace, spent on things I would never know. When the house sold, the HELOC would come out of the proceeds, and Marcus would receive the remainder, and our father would have nothing. No house. No equity built over 40 years. No place to live. My father, on his current income and with his medical needs, could not afford a rental. He would have no choice but to move in with one of us, which Marcus knew perfectly well because Marcus was planning to be in Costa Rica. The night I found the HELOC documents, I was sitting at my kitchen table at 11:30 at night with my father's financial records spread across every surface. I had a glass of water I had stopped drinking. I had a yellow legal pad covered in numbers. My hands were not shaking. I noticed that specifically. My hands were completely still. I thought about my father standing in the kitchen 2 weeks ago, confused, because he could not remember if he had taken his morning medication, asking me to help him check the pill organizer, looking at me with those patient eyes that trusted me completely. I thought about Rosie's horse drawings on the refrigerator. I thought about my mother's roses, still blooming every June. And I thought he was going to let the bank foreclose on those roses. I picked up my phone and called Susan Park at 7 the next morning. The following 3 weeks were the most careful and deliberate of my life. I am a mortgage underwriter. I spend my days finding the document that does not match, the number that does not belong, the signature that is not quite right. I brought all of that to bear on my own family, and I am not going to pretend it did not feel like a particular kind of violence. But I did it. Susan Park filed an emergency petition for guardianship and conservatorship on behalf of my father. Because the petition included documented evidence of financial exploitation, the court issued a temporary restraining order on the property, which was transmitted to the county recorder and to the title company. The sale could not proceed. The title company's general counsel, whom I had already spoken to, flagged the transaction and put a hold on the closing. I also went to the bank. I sat with their fraud and elder financial abuse team, a woman named Patricia Owens, who had clearly had this conversation many times before, and I walked through everything I had found. She told me the steps they would take. She told me what I could expect. She asked if I was all right, and I said yes. And I think she knew that was not entirely true. I moved my father's liquid assets into a new account with only my name on it, as his court-appointed temporary conservator. The old account, the one Marcus had access to, I left open with a small balance, enough that anyone checking would think nothing had changed yet. Then I waited. Marcus did not call. He did not stop by the house. He texted me once to ask how Dad was doing, and I said Dad was fine. We had dinner last Sunday, and he responded with a thumbs up emoji. The closing date came and went. I did not reach out. I needed him to make his move and discover what had happened on his own. I was at my desk at work on a Tuesday afternoon, reviewing a refinance application, when Diane called me. Not Marcus, Diane. Her voice was small and strange, the voice of someone who has just been told something and is still standing in the middle of it. She said, "Claire, Marcus just called me from the airport. He said the closing fell through and he's been trying to reach the title company and they're not calling back, and he's saying something about a court order and I don't understand what's happening. Is something wrong with your dad? Is your dad okay?" And there it was. She did not know. She had not known. Whatever version of this Marcus had given her, it had not included the part where he was selling her father-in-law's house out from under him to fund their retirement without telling anyone. I took a breath. I said, "Diane, my dad is okay. But I need you to let me call you back tonight, because there are some things you need to know, and I want to be able to tell you all of them, not just some of them." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Okay." I called her back that evening, sitting on my couch with a cup of tea going cold on the coffee table. I told her everything. Not in anger, not to wound her, but because she was about to have a conversation with her husband that she deserved to walk into with full information. I heard her start to cry somewhere around the part where I described my father not knowing his house was for sale. She apologized, and I told her she had nothing to apologize for, and I meant it. Marcus called me 40 minutes after I hung up with Diane. He did not start with an explanation or a defense. He started with his voice at full volume, the version of Marcus the first I'd heard exactly twice in my life, once when he was 17 and once now. He said I had stolen his closing, I had gone behind his back, I had abused a legal process to meddle in something that was none of my business, and I had no idea what I was doing. He said Dad had agreed to this. He said Dad had wanted this. He said I was a jealous, controlling little sister who had never been able to let him be the one in charge of anything. I let him finish. I said, "Marcus, I need you to listen to me. Dad did not agree to this. Dad does not know his house is listed. I have a recording of a conversation I had with him 3 weeks ago where I asked him directly, and he had no idea. I have the guardianship petition, I have the conservatorship order, and I have documentation of the HELOC you took out in April. I have spoken to the county district attorney's office about elder financial abuse statutes in this state. I am not your enemy in this, but I need you to understand exactly where you are standing right now." The silence on the line was so complete, I thought for a moment the call had dropped. Then he said quietly, "You went to the DA?" "I gathered the documentation," I said. "I have not filed anything yet. That's your window, Marcus." He flew back the next day, not to Costa Rica, home. I had asked Susan Park to arrange a meeting at her office, and I had asked our father's oldest friend, a man named Gerald who had known Dad since college and who my father trusted completely, to be there as a support. Gerald sat in the corner and did not say a word, but his presence mattered. I sat across from Marcus at a conference table with a folder in front of me. I opened it. I walked him through the full accounting. Every withdrawal from my father's account that did not correspond to a legitimate household expense. The power of attorney and the circumstances under which it was signed. The HELOC, the $55,000, where it had gone. The listing agreement, the accepted offer, the projected closing proceeds, and where they were scheduled to be wired. Marcus did not look at me while I talked. He looked at the table. When I finished, I closed the folder and I said, "There are 2 paths. The first one is that you sign an agreement acknowledging the unauthorized nature of the HELOC and the attempted property sale, and you assign over your share of any future proceeds from the eventual sale of the house, whenever Dad decides he wants to sell it, to his care fund. In exchange, I do not file the elder abuse complaint with the DA. You get to go home to your daughter. You get to figure out your finances some other way, a way that does not involve Dad's house." He looked up for the first time. "The second path," I said, "is that I file everything I have with the DA's office tomorrow morning. Elder financial exploitation in this state is a felony. The fraudulent use of a power of attorney for personal financial gain when the principal has documented cognitive impairment is something Susan can explain to you in much more detail. But the word that matters is felony." Marcus put his face in his hands. He sat like that for a long time. Gerald in the corner did not move. Susan Park looked at her notepad. I looked at my brother and tried to find somewhere in me the version of this that was simple, anger, or contempt, something that would make it easier. I could not find it. He was my brother. He had once driven 4 hours in a snowstorm to help me when my car broke down on the highway. He had also, using a legal document our confused father barely remembered signing, tried to sell the house my father had built before I was born in order to fund a retirement he had not earned. Both of those things were true. I have learned that you have to hold them both. He signed the agreement. Diane filed for divorce 4 months later. I do not know all of what went into that decision, but I know that what I told her on the phone that evening was part of it. She and Rosie are living with Diane's mother now, and Rosie still sends my father her horse drawings. My father does not know all the details of what happened, and Susan Park and I made a careful decision together about what level of understanding he needed, given his condition. He knows Marcus did some things with the house that were not right. He knows it has been handled. Some days he seems to understand more than he lets on. Other days he asks me to sit with him on the porch, and we watch the neighborhood go quiet in the evening, and he talks about my mother, and I do not bring up anything else. The house is still on Alderman Street. The roses my mother planted bloom every June. My father makes chili from scratch on Sundays and yells at the weatherman. Marcus is in our lives in the complicated, careful way of someone who did a serious thing and is slowly, imperfectly, trying to reckon with it. He calls on Sundays. He came to Dad's birthday in March and sat at the far end of the table and was very quiet. I do not know if he and I will ever be what we were before, and I have stopped spending energy trying to figure that out. Some things, once you have really looked at them, cannot be unseen. What I know is this: my father's hands built that house. He turned those porch railings on a lathe in the garage. He planted that oak tree the year Marcus was born. He hung a tire swing for me when I was 7, and he still sits under that tree when the weather is warm and reads paperback westerns and falls asleep with the book open on his chest. None of that was for sale. It never was, and now it never will be. If you are the person in your family who sees the spreadsheets, who reads the documents, who notices the numbers that do not add up, I want you to hear something. The guilt you feel about using those skills to protect someone you love from the people who are supposed to love them too is real, and it is heavy, and it does not go away quickly. But there is a moment, and you will know it when it comes, when the guilt becomes something else. It becomes clarity. And when that happens, you do what needs to be done. You protect what matters. You protect the roses.